You got me the whole time, though, so that's where we are. I'm holding today's hearing because I am concerned that student loan servicers are once again failing millions of borrowers. This is my third hearing on student loan servicer misconduct. My first one was my first hearing as chair of this banking subcommittee. It was in April 2021, and at that hearing, Senator Kennedy and I heard deeply troubling testimony about how student loan servicers were intentionally making misrepresentations to borrowers and preventing them from getting the relief that the law said they were entitled to. Now, a lot has happened since then. FIA and Navient, two of the student loan servicers that testified at our hearing, have left the federal student loan system, as have other servicers. President Biden has moved to cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans, and an extremist Supreme Court has blocked that relief for borrowers. But President Biden did not give up. By fixing existing programs, he has already canceled student loan debt for nearly 4 million borrowers, more than any president in history, and he has moved forward with Plan B to expand debt relief to tens of millions more. In total, President Biden's actions, once finalized, will cancel student debt for 30 million Americans. That's 30 million lives that will be changed, and the lives of their families, the lives of their friends. This is important. So today, we focus on the servicers, the corporations that have made hundreds of millions of dollars administering the student loan program. Student loan payments were paused during the COVID-19 pandemic, and last year the pause ended and borrowers returned to payment. Now, despite receiving numerous warnings and federal funding throughout the payment pause to get ready, every single student loan servicer failed to adequately prepare for the transition back to repayment, every single one of them. A new report that I released today yes, that was smoothly known as the visual, reveals that servicers badly misled borrowers during the return to repayment. These servicers made millions of billing errors and received thousands and thousands of borrower complaints. Servicers subjected borrowers to long phone waits, with some borrowers literally waiting for hours before getting hold of a live person. And that was true even when the servicer had made a mistake that could only be corrected by reaching a live person. Servicers had years to prepare for this transition to repayment, and they still screwed up. MOHELA was one of the worst. MOHELA serves over 8 million borrowers and is the only servicer for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. MOHELA has caused problems for millions of people. First, MOHELA's performance during borrowers' return to repayment was shockingly bad. After payments resumed in October, MOHELA sent the wrong bills to approximately 300,000 borrowers. 300,000 borrowers got the wrong amount in their bills, and they sent late billing statements to 2.5 million borrowers. MOHELA's failures led the Department of Education to withhold about $7.2 million in payments to MOHELA. So last year, I wrote to all of the servicers and to the Department of Education requesting information about the servicing problems facing borrowers. The data I got back was truly shocking. The numbers showed that MOHELA had the longest average call wait time of any servicer. Now, as borrowers once again begin to make payments, MOHELA had a call abandonment rate of 35%. Let me say that again. 1 in 3 MOHELA borrowers were on hold or shuffled around so long that they just finally gave up on their calls. Evidently, MOHELA figured out that if they made the call system impenetrable, MOHELA wouldn't have to talk with so many people who were experiencing the problems that MOHELA had caused. Now, maybe it's no surprise that MOHELA received the most complaints of any federal student loan servicer in 2023. MOHELA has failed borrowers of all kinds, but it has been particularly derelict in its duties administering the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. PSLF is how we say thank you to teachers and nurses and service members and firefighters and others who borrow money to go to school, then use their educations working in public service. Under MOHELA's watch, the backlog of PSLF forms hit a peak of 1 million. This meant that many teachers and nurses and firefighters did not get the relief that they were entitled to until much later, so late that some borrowers continue to make payments on debts that should have already been canceled. MOHELA knew that it had problems, and many of those problems caused borrowers to pick up the phone and call for help. Last month, a blockbuster report by the Student Borrower Protection Center and the American Federation of Teachers documented MOHELA's response to those calls. Instead of just hiring and training more people to help clean up the mess that it had made, MOHELA implemented a call deflection scheme. That meant that a firefighter or a teacher who called in would be diverted away from live agents to dead-end parts of its website. The borrower had no choice except to place the call again and hope that the second time around, or the third or the fourth or the fifth, they would get a better result. Finally, MOHELA played a central role in blocking President Biden's boldest attempt to fix this broken student loan system through litigation against the president's first debt cancellation plan. If it weren't for MOHELA, 43 million borrowers might have gotten the student debt relief that President Biden laid out for them. Clearly, there are serious problems at MOHELA, problems that have an impact on millions of borrowers. So I invited MOHELA's CEO, Scott Giles, to testify today at this hearing and to provide Congress and the American people with some answers about what's gone wrong. He refused my invitation, a flat no. I want everybody to pause to think about what that means. His company gets paid hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars to administer a federal program. And his company's administration of that program is a mess. But instead of answering for his failures, Giles just goes into hiding. I do not understand why MOHELA should be let within 10,000 feet of a student loan program. And I think it's long past time that the Department of Education holds MOHELA accountable for its failures. I can assure you we are not finished here. We will get answers. At today's hearing, we will learn more about MOHELA's failures, our broken student loan system, and the ways that we can fix it. Student loan borrowers deserve better than MOHELA. And when Ranking Member Kennedy comes in, we will listen to his opening statement. In the meantime, I'm going to go to our witnesses. So let me start here. I'm going to introduce all the witnesses, and then we'll go down the row. I am first pleased to introduce Kathleen White. Ms. White taught at a community college for 26 years before retiring recently. She is a union member with the American Federation of Teachers. She has firsthand experience with MOHELA's servicing failures. Thank you very much for being here, Ms. White. Ms. Persis Yu is the Deputy Executive Director and Managing Counsel at the Student Borrower Protection Center. She has dedicated her career to fighting on behalf of borrowers and is an expert on the student loan servicing system. Thank you, Ms. Yu, for being here. Next, Mr. Jason Delisle is a non-resident senior fellow at the Center on Education Data and Policy for the Urban Institute. He previously served as the director of the Federal Education Budget Project at New America and was a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you for being here. Is it Delisle or Delisle? Delisle, I did get it right the first time. Scott Buchanan is the executive director of the Student Loan Servicing Alliance, which is the trade association for federal and private student loan servicers. He has also worked as a consultant to financial services companies, and he has served as vice president for Navient and held several roles as an officer for Sallie Mae. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Buchanan. And lastly, the Honorable Quentin Lucas is the 55th mayor of Kansas City, Missouri, representing over 500,000 residents. Previously, he represented Kansas City's 3rd District at large on the City Council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being with us. So now I'm going to turn to Ms. White for her opening statement. Ms. White, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Senator Warren, committee members, and guests. My name is Kathleen White. I was the first in my family to attend college. I started at 16 years old and I paid for my own education. I began in 1973 and completed both a BA and MA degree. Both my husband and I were middle-income public service employees with 3 sons who all attended college. Our family needed grants, scholarships, and student loans to supplement our tuition payments. Over 40 years, I have paid $305,000 in student loan payments. They were ever-present one generation to the next, and I was never in default. Thanks to my education, I became a community college teacher. I taught future teachers. I loved my career. I chose to enter it, and I'm grateful for my education, which allowed me the best career. I recently retired at age 65 after 26 years of full-time teaching. In 2017, I learned about public service loan forgiveness. I applied and was denied. I applied to federal loan servicing. I was told I did not have eligible loan types. I was disappointed because even at that date, I had payments of $360 a month due through 2037. By the way, I would have been 81 years old in 2037. I hope I still get there, but 81, still paying. In 2020, renewed outreach by student loan advocacy groups included assurances that PSLF applicants would be reconsidered with the new federal administration. At that time, I worked with AFT, my union, and with the Student Loan Service, Meet Summer, which assists borrowers like me in navigating the system. I had loans serviced by Sallie Mae, Nelnet, and later Navient between 2008 and 18. During this 10-year period, I made 120 on-time payments. In 2020, I still owed $29,000. I was informed that I needed to submit forms by October 31st because there was a broader consideration of loan types and a waiver in place, and different types of loans would be considered and counted. I was excited. I was directed by Navient to MOHELA, the new servicer. I downloaded all the forms from the MOHELA website and was told that only paper copies could be submitted. I met with Meet Summer, and they faxed my forms into MOHELA. I have proof of the faxes, one that arrived on September 16th and the other on October 5th, 2022. That was the beginning of my saga. MOHELA was unable to answer my questions about my status as they were not able to track down those documents I had submitted. I had many questions about interest rates and my status as a retiree, and if I was eligible and the types of loans I might be reconsolidated into. I called or emailed 30 times between November 22nd to March 23rd. I was told by staff to wait 20 to 90 days to call back. I was also told that there was new legislation and pending rulings, and they may not get to my forms until July 2023. Navient also had no information. I was in a gray area in a lost land. I had no servicer. Call wait times to MOHELA often exceeded 1 to 2 hours on hold. Decreasing call center hours meant that I had to call at certain times because I was from the West Coast. Staff were in training without ability to accelerate complicated cases or address questions that deviated from standard general topics. All the employees were polite and they were helpful, but it seemed like they did not have the tools to escalate to a supervisor or to answer questions like mine. Finally, in March 23, evidence of my PSLF appeared on the MOHELA site. I was then told I had to submit a new form to AidVantage, which I submitted. I was told there was recent changes to legislation and I may be eligible. I filed a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and all told, I had to file 7 complaints because I never got the answers I needed. I do want to, brevity is not my point here. So I will tell you that after the COVID pandemic pause, I received a bill, despite thinking I was eligible for PSLF, $393 per month. I paid it. It was a hard check to write. I continued to pay in November and December. I finally received notification that they had received my forms and that I was put on forbearance. That scared me because forbearance meant interest was still collecting, right? And I didn't know if that meant I was eligible. Finally, on February 6th, 2024, I received a form letter thanking me for my public service and indicating that my principal and interest totaling $29,765 had been forgiven. I taped the letter to my front door and I cried. On behalf of every public service employee and every eligible teacher, I'm here to advocate for change. It shouldn't take a year and a half to gain the public service forgiveness that we believe we're entitled to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. I appreciate your being here today. So sorry the travails and how long it took, but so happy you got to a good conclusion with it. Thank you. Ms. Yu, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman, ranking members, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you so much for inviting me here to testify today. My name is Persis Yu, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director and Managing Counsel of the Student Borrower Protection Center. Our mission is to alleviate the burden of student debt for millions of borrowers across the nation. Addressing the student debt crisis is a critical racial and economic justice issue. Student loans were created to be a tool of social and economic mobility, to allow families, regardless of their race or economic status, to unlock the promise of an education. But for too many, student debt has become a life sentence, preventing too many borrowers from starting or growing their families, buying homes, and saving for their future. This administration has made unprecedented progress using every tool available to it to fix the student loan system and provide much-needed relief. Nearly 4 million people are debt-free, and their lives are so much better for it. Earlier this week, the President unveiled further details of his plans to enact debt relief using authority under the Higher Education Act, which could benefit 30 million borrowers. But we know that this unprecedented progress and momentum is gravely threatened by the same servicers that get paid hundreds of millions of dollars to help borrowers manage their payments. The Student Borrower Protection Center and the AFT put out a report we call the MOHELA Papers, which uncovers evidence from a years-long investigation into MOHELA, the primary servicer responsible for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and the same servicer that was central in the Supreme Court case that robbed 40+ million borrowers of debt relief. We found that at a time when tens of millions of borrowers are stretching their budgets and struggling to navigate a complicated and changing student loan system, more than 4 in 10 MOHELA customers experienced a servicing failure. Instead of performing basic servicing functions such as providing borrowers with access to correct and timely information, MOHELA chose a complex call deflection scheme, a Byzantine loop of misinformation and false promises. As the sole servicer administering the PSLF program, MOHELA's servicing failures particularly harm public service workers and prevent them from getting relief. Most recent federal records show that under MOHELA, the backlog of unprocessed forms grew, exceeding at points 1.2 million forms and persisting for several reporting periods at more than 800,000 forms. Public service workers with eligible employment are getting denied. MOHELA sent incorrect bills to more than 250,000 borrowers and failed to send bills at all to more than 2 million borrowers, pushing 800,000 borrowers into delinquency. The call deflection scheme diverts borrowers away from customer service representatives, often to non-operative parts of MOHELA's website. Many of the servicing functions borrowers reach out for can only be performed by a live person. For low-income borrowers, this could be the difference between hundreds, if not thousands, of dollars over this next year. Amidst a time of unprecedented confusion and uncertainty, millions of borrowers reached out only to be led astray. Today, you will hear from industry lobbyists paid to offer spin, point fingers, and attempt to shield MOHELA from public scrutiny. They will claim they do not have sufficient resources. But since the pandemic started, MOHELA tripled the size of its portfolio. Make no mistake, MOHELA made choices and must be held accountable for them. But MOHELA is just the latest bad actor. Borrower advocates, federal and state regulators, law enforcement officials, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau have all documented a history of servicing misconduct and widespread failures across the industry. These failures create obstacles to repayment, raise costs, cause distress, and drive borrowers to default. The department has taken some actions to hold MOHELA accountable. However, these actions fail to provide full and adequate remedy to those borrowers who have been harmed. And critically, they do not hold the company's executives accountable. Several states have consumer protection laws that should prevent unfair and deceptive practices, but servicers, MOHELA included, often attempt to evade accountability by asserting that these laws don't apply to them, claiming consumer protections are preempted by the Higher Education Act and they are shielded from liability through sovereign immunity. Today's hearing is an opportunity to hold MOHELA accountable. And while MOHELA CEO could not muster the courage to appear before you today publicly, I point your attention to the borrowers in this room, at this table and right behind me. These borrowers have taken time out of their busy lives, traveled away from their families to be here in hopes that this body will believe their lived experiences and bring an end to MOHELA's cycle of scandal, deception, and borrower abuse. It is time to cancel student debt. It is time to make college free, and it is time to fire MOHELA. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yu. Mr. Delisle.
Chair Warren, Ranking Member Kennedy, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify about student loan servicing today. The views expressed in my testimony are my own and should not be attributed to the Urban Institute, its trustees, or its funders. Nearly all the student debt that's outstanding and is issued through the federal student loan program. And as you know, the government doesn't actually service these loans itself, even though it holds and makes them. It hires private companies to do that, to do most of, but not all, the interaction with borrowers. And so servicing plays a really important role in the smooth and correct functioning of the program. But I think it's important to point out that there are other actors involved here as well. Congress and the Department of Education also play a role in how the student loan program operates. And I think there are two ways in which the policy and administrative decisions that they have made have increased the risk and potential that borrowers are confused and frustrated and that there are servicing problems. First, the student loan program is very, very complex. It has grown incredibly complicated, particularly in recent years. There are many different benefits, many different repayment plans. Many of these overlap. Many of them are mutually exclusive. If you use some of them, you disqualify yourself from other benefits. All of this information and complexity requires borrowers to understand a lot of information. It requires servicers to process a lot of information. It requires the Department of Ed to create a lot of rules and processes that they then convey to the servicers. So in addition to this complexity, the Biden administration has made a lot of changes to the student loan program in recent years. And I think that too has increased the risk that borrowers are confused and frustrated, and also the risk of some servicing problems. The Biden administration has issued waivers that have essentially rewritten the rules of existing student loan programs. They've created deadlines, which we've just heard about, that that create servicing bottlenecks as borrowers who were never eligible under the existing statutes, thousands and thousands of them suddenly overnight become eligible, and they flood their servicer with calls and questions. And I'm not surprised that there are significant delays. The Biden administration has also essentially created new programs in the student loan program, and the servicers have to administer those. The Department of Ed has to issue new guidance to servicers. And all of that creates a lot of risk of borrower confusion and frustration with a loan program, which is certainly what we have. So with my remaining time, I'm going to talk about a few ways I think the loan program can be reformed that will make it less prone to borrower confusion, frustration, and servicing problems. One, I think the program should be simplified. Fewer plans, fewer benefits, fewer options. So for example, establish one income-driven repayment plan. There are 4 now. The Biden administration has added a new one. It is the most complicated one created to date. And remove the Secretary's authority to create new income-driven repayment plans in the future. I think this will greatly increase the simplicity of the program and reduce risk of servicing problems. I would eliminate forbearance and deferment benefits in the program. Use income-driven repayment to determine and ensure loans are affordable rather than these other benefits, which, as we heard earlier, interact with public service loan forgiveness and interact with income-driven repayment in a way that frustrate and confuse borrowers. Another simplification, I think the program would work better if we eliminated interest. No interest on student loans, and instead the program charges one origination fee up front so that borrowers' balances never grow. There's no confusion about how much they owe. What you owe is the balance when you begin your repayment. I also think that Congress should reclaim control over many of the features of the program. I think what we've seen under the Biden administration is the program is very open-ended, and the administration has used the open-ended nature of the program to create a lot of new programs and change terms retroactively in the program, and I think that has created the risk for a lot of servicing problems. Lastly, I think a major reform, this is a big one, I think a way of removing servicers altogether from the student loan program. One way to do that would be to collect student loan payments through the tax system. If you have an income-driven repayment system, you can collect loans through the tax system, removing servicers, and I think creating a simpler program for borrowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Buchanan.
Chair Warren, Ranking Member Kennedy, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm the Executive Director of the Student Loan Servicing Alliance, and we're a nonprofit trade association focused on helping student loan borrowers with their servicing needs. My members are a mix of companies, state agencies, and nonprofits. They serve over 95% of all student loan servicing in the country, including federal and private loans. The work they do begins and ends with what is best for borrowers. I will start with some facts on how servicing works. Today, the federal government originates all student loans, federal student loans, and contracts with servicers for several reasons. The Department of Education, or ED, does not have the internal capacity to assist student borrowers, therefore it relies upon contractual partnerships. We function as a utility that does the day-to-day work for these programs. Working together collaboratively is the only path towards enhanced borrower success. Second, servicers are fee-for-service contractors. Ed servicers do not have any financial ownership in the underlying loans, and we do not set the myriad options available to borrowers, some of these shown here. They work at the direction of the Office of Federal Student Aid, or FSA, an office inside of the Department of Education, and according to their contracts. Over the past few years, FSA has in writing cut services, while repayment options have gotten more complex. All while the government invests into servicing this massively complicated program, less than 1/5 of what a mortgage servicer is paid to manage a far simpler loan. Finally, political special interest groups and government officials have gotten into the game of spinning false narratives about what servicers do and then cajoling other federal and state regulators to conduct oversight or make threats when servicers are simply performing the contractual duties specified by the department. This kind of game has led 7 other servicers to tell the government they will no longer perform the work. The tautology here is that the CFPB and others are really saying that FSA itself is knowingly directing servicers to perform abusive actions and then accusing us of failing to meet phantom expectations that do not exist in our contracts. But we're really here likely because of a document produced by a political organization with false and misleading statements and phrases like dark history, company schemes, and uncovered documents. That kind of imagery is straight out of a John Grisham novel, but it is equally as fictional. Let's meet that with some facts. Some suggest that the servicer developed and implemented a strategy called call deflection and suggest they did so to harm borrowers. That is false. In fact, FSA mandated all servicers utilize this strategy and included it in their own playbook to servicers. This approach encouraged borrowers who can to self-service online rather than waiting to speak with a customer service representative. This was government guidance. Recent accusations suggesting servicers are responsible for a large backlog of public service loan forgiveness applications and that the backlog is intentional are also false. Today, FSA makes all decisions about whether to approve or deny forgiveness, and so the vast majority of the backlog resides at a resource-constrained FSA, which is now also struggling with the massive FAFSA failures. The assertion that a servicer wants to engage in delays or rejections for its financial benefit is grossly unjust to the thousands of employees who work every day trying to help borrowers. But a better use of our time today would be an honest assessment of the challenge federal servicers face and borrowers face and the steps we can work on together. First, fund quality service. For several years, the government has flat-funded servicing and customer support when borrowers most need it. Congress makes these choices through appropriations. The government gets what it pays for, and when you don't make that choice, then borrowers pay the price. Second, change the law to fix what's broken. Most of the complaints about the functioning of the loan program are matters of statute. There is this false trope that 99% of borrowers had been denied in the past for PSLF forgiveness because of some mistake or operational failure. That is false. Congress designed the program to be intentionally drafted to be narrowly focused and harder to obtain the forgiveness. Servicers were tasked with implementing that law, and we did so. Even the administration recognizes this fact, asserting it needed to use temporary emergency authority to bypass the law to provide this additional and expanded forgiveness. But that will end, and so Congress must act. Since my time is limited, I will close by saying that I'm pleased to be here to have this conversation, but I hope it results in us working together to fix the problems that exist as opposed to just blaming servicers for simply doing what the department asks and pays them to do and what the law requires. Servicers care deeply about borrowers' experiences just as you do, so let's focus on the root cause and so we can do borrowers justice. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mayor Lucas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your report and for having me here today. My name is Quentin Lucas. I am the mayor of Kansas City, a city of 508,000 people in Middle America, but a city where this challenge is reflected not just here, but around the country. I am also a former MOHELA borrower, and I'm the son of a student loan borrower, a single mother who went to community college, created opportunities for my sisters and I, and as we struggled, as we persevered, I recognize the challenges that borrowers have faced every day. America's mayors, including myself, are on the front lines of the $1.7 trillion student debt crisis, because fundamentally what we try to create each day for our residents are more opportunities. Opportunities to start businesses, to build their lives, to raise their families, without having to make choices between paying student loans and covering other debts, between buying the necessities in life that they need and paying those student loan obligations. The burden is especially strong for Black women in our city, on the east side of Kansas City, for Latinas on the west side of Kansas City. And this student debt crisis has perpetuated racial inequalities in my city and many others. Student debt relief and accountability fundamentally would alleviate the financial burden on our residents, helping families cover rising costs of living, and encouraging them, importantly, to invest in our local economies and their own futures. As mayors, we are uniquely positioned to engage with local student loan borrowers each day, leveraging the local insights of existing social service programs and channels, and working to provide and support direct services like financial coaching and nonprofit legal service partnerships. But we cannot do this alone. We are very simply asking for accountability for service providers. While I'm incredibly grateful for more than $138 billion in student loan debt relief for 4 million Americans, I recognize that there are still in my city alone 80,000 Kansas Cityans with $575 million of debt. There remains a limit and an impediment on their ability to succeed. By targeting accountability and relief to borrowers with the highest economic need, this plan would have meaningful progress at reducing the racial wealth gap, which is an issue we continue to look for a solution for each day at all of our city halls. I also continue to hear stories from borrowers about student loan servicers. I remember some of my own. And don't get me wrong, I am blessed. I've been able to pay off my loans. I've been able to build a wonderful career. I want to create an opportunity for so many others to do so. You've already heard in testimony today the sometimes hours of wait times on phone calls, a 39-day average email response time frame, 39 days. When you are trying to decide how to live your life and to make choices, that is a fundamental impediment on your ability to look for more progress. We've heard more: posting incorrect monthly payments, misplacing records and payments, denying promised relief. Mistakes like these hurt borrowers. And by the way, borrowers are people. They're teachers, they're firefighters, they're nurses, they're moms, they're dads, they're us. They are our residents. And this is a harm that causes harm to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans. Student loan servicers have one job: to support borrowers as they work to manage their student loan debt. And as all of us spend time thinking about how we can build economic development and activity in all of our Americans, many of us recognize that accountability and cancellation of student debt would be the single largest investment in America's working people that we can today, with real benefits for everyone, and it would be equitable and right for America. I make one final point. Each day as a mayor, we deal with all types of issues, ranging from violent crime to housing to everything under the sun. But who do we have working on the front lines to address those issues? Social workers, teachers, nurses, and we need a lot more of them in America. So we can spend all the time in the world thinking about the end-run concerns, or we can address important issues now. Very simple accountability, good service, quality service, and cancellation for those most in need. That's what would have helped my family when I was coming up, and that's what would help millions of Americans and thousands of Kansas Cityans today. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I will now yield to myself for the first round of questions. Oh, this is going to be fun. So as we've been talking about, MOHELA is the largest, one of the country's largest student loan servicers. Since joining the federal student loan system in 2011, MOHELA has voluntarily signed contracts worth billions of dollars with the federal government. In the past few years, it has tripled in size, and today, 1 out of every 5 federal student loan borrowers, that's about 8 million people, has MOHELA as their servicer. Now, the actual job of a student loan servicer is pretty straightforward. MOHELA is responsible for communicating with borrowers about their loans, processing their payments, and advising borrowers on their repayment options. That's it. And for 3 years during COVID, during the payment pause, MOHELA had a lot less to do than normal in many ways. Even so, the federal government faithfully paid MOHELA throughout the pause, sending them hundreds of millions of dollars so that when the payments came back online, MOHELA would be ready to do its job and process those payments and advise those borrowers accurately. Ms. Yu, let's start with the sending out bills. That's how borrowers restart their payments. As we approach the restart last October, did MOHELA send billing statements to its borrowers on time?
No, MOHELA failed to send billing statements to 2.5 million borrowers.
Okay, so they didn't even get them out the door on time for 2.5 million people. Then, Ms. Yu, for those who did get their bills, did MOHELA send accurate bills?
No, MOHELA sent inaccurate bills to approximately 280,000 borrowers.
Okay, so people were told they owed one amount of money, and in fact, they owed a different amount. So after years of collecting money during the payment pause and plenty of time to get ready and countless warnings from the Department of Education, from advocates, and from members of Congress, MOHELA failed to do its most basic job. Messing up these loans mattered. People struggled with budgeting and other financial commitments, and according to the Department of Education, 800,000 of MOHELA's borrowers became delinquent on their loans because of the company's mistakes. Now, when a loan servicer messes up, the borrower picks up the phone and calls to try to get those problems fixed. These are not problems that can just automatically be fixed online. So, how did that work out? Ms. Yu, your organization, the Student Borrower Protection Center, conducted a years-long investigation alongside the American Federation of Teachers into MOHELA's performance as a student loan servicer. For people who had billing errors or other problems and tried to correct them on MOHELA's website, were they at least able to get it worked out?
No, borrowers who needed help with refunds or processing errors had to contact a customer service representative. In fact, MOHELA's own internal documents list 28 different issues where self-servicing on the website isn't sufficient. To make matters worse, MOHELA's website was missing key information and was oftentimes inaccessible to borrowers during the return treatment.
Okay, so they couldn't correct it online. In fact, if they tried to correct it online, they often found inaccurate information. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. So how about the people who actually then got on the phone? Were they able to straighten out their problems?
There's a good chance that they were then directed back to MOHELA's website.
Right. So they were sent to the website that has the mistaken information on it.
That's correct. MOHELA set up a call deflection scheme memorialized in its communications playbook from October 2023, which diverted borrowers away from customer service representatives and directed them to the website. MOHELA even tried to prevent borrowers from contacting MOHELA in the first place by requesting that FSA not include their contact information on key pieces of information.
Wait, so they actually asked that no one be able to get the information so that they would be able to call them to correct the errors that MOHELA had made?
That's correct.
You know, this is just stunning. I just want to summarize what we've got here. MOHELA made errors in millions of borrowers' accounts, then actively worked to prevent borrowers from getting the help they needed by trapping them in these endless loops. MOHELA even had a name for it. It was called call deflection. An internal email revealed by SBPC and AFT's report. I found this in your report. It shows that even MOHELA's general counsel worried that the public might find this just a little bit shady. No kidding. The federal government paid MOHELA millions of dollars so it would be ready to help people make payments once the payment pause ended. MOHELA messed that up for millions of borrowers and then intentionally tried to dodge the calls that it would take to straighten it out. Shame on them. So thank you. Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For years, my office has received outreach from dedicated public service employees, firefighters, police officers, teachers, and many others who have expressed their frustration when attempting to contact MOHELA for routine customer service issues. In fact, in a letter I wrote to Secretary Cardona last September, I noted the long wait times that my constituents have experienced when attempting to contact MOHELA representatives for any type of assistance. So, Mr. Buchanan, I heard your testimony in my office. I had another meeting going on, but when I saw you speak, I wanted to hear what you had to say. You represent student loan services. Don't you think that a bare minimum a student loan servicer can do is to be responsive to borrowers' issues?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the challenges that we faced, and I too wrote a letter to Secretary Cardona about a year before resumption began, indicating that we needed guidance, we needed planning, we needed resources in order to make this work. Otherwise, we would face exactly this challenge. And so we worked with the Department of Education to try to get that guidance. It was not forthcoming in the way it should have been, and I think we need to continue to improve that. And that's, I think, where communication with the Department of Education.
To your testimony, then the Department of Education is responsible for all the ills that we are describing here today.
No, I did not say that. I
Okay,
believe.
so what are the ills that the servicers are responsible for?
So I think in the end of the day, we do make mistakes from time to time. When we were servicing more than 35 million borrowers in a complicated program that has more than 4 income-based repayment plans and all these sorts of things, we are going to make errors. But in fact, the errors that were just talked about a second ago, I think there's really some mistakes to be said about them. Number one, with the issue of like 280,000, those people were not billed incorrectly. They did not get a bill. If they looked online, they would have seen that. But that was as a result of the fact that we got incorrect data from the Department of Education, which had to be corrected. MOHELA self-identified, and that reported that to the department and fixed that problem. We also sent out billing statements late. That's because we got guidance that was changing every late. The playbook the government gave to us was changed 10 times in 1 month.
I've heard basically, so far you told me everything that, again, the student, not that the services did wrong, but that the government did wrong. So the government is responsible for everything here.
The government gives guidance.
Even if a borrower can't get their problem fixed, MOHELA and other student loan services need to be responsive. A student loan services job is just that, to service. Now, from what I've heard from constituents, it's outrageous that many, and you can't have this, one thing after 50 years of public life, when I hear it once, okay. When I hear it twice, but when I hear it with the frequency and the depth and the stories, then you know something is wrong. So, I support additional funding for the Office of Student Aid, but I don't believe MOHELA is living up to its customer service commitments under its existing contract. I highlighted this issue 6 months ago. It's time to resolve these service issues once and for all. Last year, Senator Braun and I introduced the bipartisan PSLF Fairness Completion Act to help dedicated public service employees get the student debt relief to which they are entitled. The legislation removes a technicality in federal law that requires applicants be employed in public service role at the time of the application for forgiveness, even if they already made the 120 qualified payments. That onerous regulation has negatively affected public service employees who completed their 120 payments, decided to retire, move on to other public service, move on to other careers, and suddenly become ineligible. Ms. Yu, how would passing legislation like the PSLF Fairness Completion Act positively impact PSLF borrowers?
Thank you, Senator. This is a truly heartbreaking issue that you raise. We hear from so many borrowers who have done their 10 years of public service and now are trapped in a lifetime of debt because of this one requirement. This bill would be critical, and eliminating this provision would be critical to ensuring that so many public service workers who are trapped in debt, who have completed their 10 years of public service, would finally get the forgiveness they deserve.
It seems like it's just. Now, currently 43 million people have outstanding student debt totaling $1.6 trillion. Previously, canceled student loan debt was considered taxable income by the IRS, and thus individuals would receive debt, who received debt cancellation would face a huge surprise tax bill. Senator Warren and I worked together on this, and I'm proud that our Student Loan Tax Relief Act, included as part of the American Rescue Plan, saved these individuals who got loan forgiveness from being hit with tax consequences and surprise taxes. But the provision sunsets in 2025. And I'm worried that any forgiven student debt, and see the President is very much engaged in trying to maximize it, will result in a burdensome tax bill. What would be the consequences for borrowers if we let this provision expire?
Thank you. I'm incredibly concerned about letting this provision expire. The consequences would be severe. Borrowers with disabilities, low-income borrowers will trade an unaffordable student loan bill for an unaffordable tax bill. These provisions absolutely need to be extended.
Thank you. Madam Chair, may I ask one more question? Of course. Thank you. In a letter I wrote to Secretary Cardona last year, I noted that many borrowers had reported that they did not receive credit for all the qualifying PSLF payments they have made, and some borrowers who had been approved for forgiveness reported long wait times to actually get the refunds to which they were entitled. Sadly, since I wrote to Secretary Cardona nearly 6 months ago, it seems these issues are still widespread. Ms. Yu, from your organization's conversations with borrowers, are you still hearing that these issues exist?
Yes. Yes, Senator, we're absolutely still hearing that these issues exist. In fact, we know of a borrower from your state of New Jersey who's been going on for 3 years trying to get their PSLF issues resolved with MOHELA. They've spent countless hours on hold speaking to various different folks, have submitted all the required paperwork, and they've been promised over and over again that they'd get a response in 15 days, only to be forced to wait for months. These borrowers report feeling hopeless, and as if the promise of PSLF will be forever out of reach for them.
Well, 3 years, 3 years. Well, I'd like to have our office work with you to identify that constituent and see if we can help them. But it shouldn't take the intervention of a United States senator to deal with it. People who are eligible to have their debt canceled under the program should not be forced into repayment due solely to MOHELA's processing delays. And we look forward to reaching out to you and see if we can help this one constituent. But we need to do better across the board. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Menendez. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for your testimony and your work on this important issue. And Senator Warren, thank you and your team for your investigation into these important issues. Ms. Yu, I'd like to ask you a question about Parent Plus loans, and thank you for working with me and my office on trying to address that very important piece of this loan puzzle. As you well know, there are almost 4 million borrowers with Parent Plus loans. Many are low-income borrowers and parents of color trying to help their children achieve the American dream. Too many of these borrowers are struggling under the weight of unaffordable payments and ever-growing interest due to the lack of access to the affordable repayment plans. Some parent borrowers are able to access SAVE, which is, as you know, the administration's newest repayment plan, through a very cumbersome process called double consolidation. This process is heavily dependent on the servicers to ensure that borrowers are correctly informed of the necessary steps and actually placed on the plan. MOHELA is one of those services. There are other services, but in our experience, we have challenges across the board when it comes to informing parents about the options and expanding the options. So, Ms. Yu, have you heard from borrowers who are struggling to navigate this process, and could you detail some of the examples?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator, for raising this critical issue. As you said, Parent Plus borrowers for so long have been ignored and left out of critical relief. For over 10 years, I was a legal services attorney and worked on behalf of low-income student loan borrowers. And I heard so many stories of parents having to make the dire choice between their own finances and their children's futures. It is fundamentally unfair that Parent Plus borrowers are forced to jump through these hoops, and they are made even worse when servicers fail to offer the critical information to let them know how to go through every single process. It is a complicated process, as we've heard, but servicers are paid hundreds of millions of dollars to work with these borrowers, and they have failed them. And we hear too many borrowers who have been told that these options are available only to have them denied. And it makes their loans unaffordable and puts them at dire risk of not being able to save for retirement. And for some people, they just can't retire.
Well, thank you, and it's been good to work with you on this. Can you suggest some other paths for relief that we might propose for these borrowers?
Absolutely. The lack of affordable options for Parent Plus borrowers is just devastating, and it leads too many borrowers to default. It makes them vulnerable for wage garnishment, for to lose their Social Security benefit. We need to have options so that Parent Plus borrowers are able to access the same kinds of affordable repayment plans as all borrowers.
Well, we're working on that, and thank you for your help. And to Mayor Lucas, thank you for your testimony. I was able to catch some of this remotely. What impact does this intergenerational debt, right? We've talked about the impact on student loans, but when you're talking about Parent Plus loans, you're sometimes talking about intergenerational debt. Both the parents and the students have these heavy burdens. What impact does that intergenerational debt have on these borrowers and their families, and how does that contribute to the racial wealth gap?
When you look at the racial wealth gap in Kansas City or any American community, it's often generated by the fact that in some families, predominantly white, they have been able to pass down some of the benefits of wealth, of home ownership, of much of the American dream. Here we are building an ongoing opposite effect, where both the younger borrower, the children, are running into long-term concerns and inabilities to be able to launch new businesses, to invest in the necessities of life, to purchase homes, and the parents themselves are seeing an eradication of whatever wealth they may hold, or ultimately finding themselves in another debt situation, creating that sort of situation where not only do we lack the familial support that so many see, but instead we are seeing generational familial burdens around that same thing, which is the search for the American dream. And so for us, we spend so much time, and I grew up in a family like this, telling folks to get an education, to do right, to build up their communities. And here what we are doing with these Parent Plus loan programs and the failures, both of accountability, but also to provide debt relief, we're creating burdens that keep them trapped, not just for a short term, but generationally, in connection with their ability to try to at least accomplish the American dream.
Right, and so, Madam Chair, I look forward to working with you on the Parent Plus loan piece. And as you, Mr. Mayor, have pointed out, it's not only the families. It's bad enough that you have that drag on sort of 2 generations, but it also has a very negative spiraling impact on everybody else who's part of that community, part of that economy. So thank all of you for your testimony today. And again, Senator Warren, thank you for your focus on this very important issue.
Well, thank you, Senator Van Hollen, for how persistently you have attacked this problem and been there in support of people who are struggling with these loans, and particularly focused everyone's attention on Parent Plus loans and the kind of squeeze that it puts families under. I appreciate it, and we've got more work to do.
We do.
So thank you. Thank you. I have some questions I want to ask about PSLF, but I want to make sure before we move on, I want to pick up on a point that Mr. Buchanan raised in his opening testimony and that Senator Menendez focused on. So before we move on, I just want to explore the argument that the federal government's student debt program is just too complicated for servicers to manage properly, that the reason it's such a mess at MOHELA is the fault of the government. Ms. Yu, I just thought maybe I'd give you a chance to respond to that argument. Do you think that servicers should not be held accountable for their failures because our system is just too hard?
Absolutely not. These servicers knew what they were signing up for. Their job is to help borrowers navigate the complexities of the student loan system. They get paid hundreds of millions of dollars each year to do that job. If they fail to do that job well, they should be held accountable.
Thank you. You know, back in 2007, Republicans and Democrats got together to create this public service loan forgiveness program. It was signed into law by President George W. Bush. And the idea was if you had to borrow money to go to school, and then you took that education, instead of going out into the private industry and maximizing the amount of money you made, you actually put it to work in public service as a teacher, as a nurse, as a firefighter, you work for municipal government, then America would cancel your debt at the end if you hadn't been able to pay it all off. And it was really just a way of saying thank you. Thank you for your many, many years of service. So, Ms. White, I understand that you took out student loans so that you could become a teacher, and that then you also took out student loans because you were a parent and trying to help your children make it through this process. And I understand that you paid back your loans and your children's loans, it says here, for 40 years. Is that right?
That's correct, $300,000.
$300,000
Correct.
that you paid back.
Correct.
So back in 2017, Betsy DeVos is the head of the Department of Education. Donald Trump's in the White House. You decided to apply for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Mm-hmm. And at that point, how long had you been working in public service?
Well, I worked a total of 26 years full-time.
Okay.
And I had at that time, I was eligible. I would have been eligible, and I had a balance of $65,000.
All right, so you had $65,000.
Remaining.
Still remaining, but you had done enough qualifying payments, and they had all been in public service. Okay. So did the Trump administration approve your PSLF loan cancellation application?
No, they did not. I was told I had a variety of loan types, and I was not eligible, but I was not given any information about how to respond or follow up or reapply.
So what did you do?
Well, I kept paying.
You just kept paying?
I kept paying $300 and something every month. And I thought that was pretty striking that I would still be paying until my 81st birthday. I do think it's problematic that seniors who are in public service, who I believe had an entitlement to public service relief based on my job and my on-time payment history, would be in that situation. Since you did call on me, I do want to say that, I carry around lots of files, but this is only for the last year and a half. These are all the communications and printed emails I received as I tried to achieve public service relief. So it took a year and a half, and I do think that people shouldn't have to be as persistent as I am. I think it should be easier, and a year and a half is just too long.
So let me just ask a little bit about that. So in 2017, the Trump administration just turns you down. Right. President Biden then gets sworn in, and they say, we're open for business again. Come on back on your PSLF loan.
Right.
We want to help people who've been in public service. So you went to MOHELA, right?
I was sent to MOHELA.
That was now your servicer.
Navient was my servicer.
Navient had been.
They said they didn't do this.
They said, we're done.
We're
so
done.
Go to MOHELA, which now covers all of the public service loan programs. They said, go to MOHELA. MOHELA will take care of this. And how long did it take you to get it straightened out with MOHELA?
A year and a half from my first submission of my employment certification form and my loan consolidation form. It was 1 year and a half.
So a year and a half after you have been in public service at that point for how long did you say?
Oh, 26 years.
26 years.
Yeah, and I filed many complaints everywhere I could complain to. I complained. I think the only advantage I had was that I was persistent, but many public service employees don't have the ability to be this persistent.
Yeah, I believe in persistent women, but it shouldn't
it shouldn't be that hard.
It shouldn't take that level of persistence in order to get your cancellation. And I just got to wrap up with this section to ask you, Mayor Lucas, can you just say a word about who benefits from this student debt cancellation? Sometimes we hear, oh, it's only people who have plenty of money. After all, they're all college graduates. Can you just talk about this a little bit from what you see right there in Kansas City?
It is, the beneficiaries are the working people of our communities who provide vital public services each day. I'll give two very brief vignettes from just this week. So I have a 3-year-old son, very cute, very fun, but can get into danger sometimes, as all parents know. Broke his arm. We were at the Children's Hospital in Kansas City. We were there in the emergency room late at night. Nurses, nurse practitioners, other medical professionals, those are the ones that are doing the work to make sure myself and my community are safe. That was just one set. The next night, coincidentally, we had an officer in the hospital who had been shot. Once again, I had a chance to talk to the people in the hospital. The officer's doing okay, by the way. Who are the ones who have taken on these obligations to be particularly in an inner city medical environment. So much of this program isn't about just people having wonderful opportunities and ways to make more money, but it's allowing us to direct public servants and public service to areas that need them vitally. So for me, a mayor of a city that has, and every city has challenges, but major inner city hospitals and schools and needs for prosecutors and so many others and social workers, as I mentioned before. This is how we get the health care we need in major American cities and rural communities. This is how we get educators in states like mine, Missouri, home of the MOHELA organization. This is how we get people to go to rural communities. This is how we get care and services. So the beneficiaries are frankly all of us. And the losers when you see programs like this, indeed, are all of us when we don't have cancellation, when we don't have accountability. That's why this matters to me, and I think it matters to so many people who are here today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for advocacy on behalf of the people of Kansas City. They're lucky to have you. So, Senator Warnock.
Thank you, Chair Warren, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. You and I have been pushing, along with others, on this very hard, and it was great to see the President's announcement yesterday. With one hand tied behind his back, President Biden and the Biden administration has provided over $146 billion in student debt relief for over 4 million Americans, and that's and then yesterday's announcement will be on top of that. That's a historic accomplishment that not only helps close the racial wealth gap, but helps boost our entire economy because, as the mayor has pointed out, we all benefit. We all benefit when more people can afford to buy their first home, when they can save for retirement, or when they can start a small business, which contributes to our overall economy. But I want to talk about how the administration's hand got tied behind its back in the first place, and the ongoing threats to debt relief for those from those who, in my view, are quite short-sighted. Ms. Yu, you're a student loan lawyer. When the Missouri Attorney General worked with other Republican AGs to sue the Biden administration and block its first attempt at broad debt cancellation, why did the Supreme Court allow the case to proceed if student debt relief does not harm anyone?
Thank you, Senator. The Missouri Attorney General argued that the state of Missouri would be harmed because MOHELA could lose loan volume if borrowers receive debt relief. So essentially what the Missouri AG argued was that it and MOHELA benefited financially when 45 million borrowers remain in debt.
So the folks who were supposed to be providing support, servicing these loans, representing their constituents, said that it would be against their best interests. Is that, am I understanding correctly?
That's correct.
So what was MOHELA's response when the Missouri AG hid behind them to get in the courtroom door to block debt relief for millions of Americans?
They stayed silent, Senator. They were complicit.
And when given the chance to stand up in court for the student loan borrowers who they are contractually bound to serve, did they stand up for them? Did they serve them?
They did not.
I think it's important for everyone to understand the role of one student loan contractor and the role that they had in blocking debt relief for millions of Americans. Of course, they're not alone. Others bear complicity in this, especially since the company currently enjoys a contract right now with the Department of Education worth millions of taxpayer dollars. But this isn't just a history lesson for everyone. I'm concerned that the past is prologue. Earlier this year, the Biden-Harris administration announced plans to provide $1.2 billion in relief for nearly 153,000 borrowers through a new repayment plan with a shorter path to forgiveness. And on Monday, as I pointed out, the administration announced that it would do debt relief for 30 million more Americans through alternative paths after the Supreme Court blocked one legal pathway, thanks in part to MOHELA. But just yesterday, the Missouri AG already launched another lawsuit. So when I think of all the things that we need attorneys general to be engaged in, protect their constituents, somehow Missouri's attorney general wakes up in the morning and thinks that this is the great service that the people of Missouri and the people of this country need. What we need is the attorney general blocking debt relief under the new repayment plan. Ms. Yu, has MOHELA taken any steps since yesterday's announcement to distance itself from a new effort to block relief under the new repayment plan and harm the student loan borrowers it's charged with serving?
It has not.
Do you think, based on this, taxpayers should continue to pay them millions of dollars to serve student loan borrowers?
No, I do not.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Well,
I will.
Well, I'm the chair now. Okay.
Chairman Fetterman.
Yeah, well, this is great, yeah. Anyway, yeah, so, Mayor, congratulations on the Super Bowl, right? Yeah. Yeah, wow.
Thank you.
How many have the Chiefs won?
So we've won 3 since I've
3?
been mayor. We've won 4 total.
That's fantastic. And I know, I mean, Pittsburgh, we have 6, and it's really great.
We are catching up,
We're a
Senator.
little bit, there might be a little bitter here, but yeah. Anyway, well, I want to address what seems to be the elephant in the room. Now, it seems to be people in the room wearing red shirts. And it seems like they're PG-13 versions of perhaps, I don't know. And I guess, and those shirts say they what? The red shirts. Yeah, okay, Fire MOHELA. So could any of the experts here on the panel, can we explain why we have people willing to wear shirts? They made them and everything. So I think they probably have an important point. So what would anyone want to address to that?
I'm happy to go first. But after we released our report, the MOHELA papers, we heard from hundreds of borrowers that this report spoke to their lived experiences, that MOHELA has more complaints at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau than any other servicer. MOHELA has more than 4 in
More than any other.
That's right.
More than anyone. Okay.
That's right. 4 in 10 of MOHELA's customers have experienced a servicing failure. Borrowers' experience need to be listened to, and the borrowers are here today to say that MOHELA has done them wrong and must be held accountable.
Anyone else would like to weigh in on that? I mean, I think it's remarkable that we have shirts here and everything. There's a lot of, seems pretty compelling. I mean, it has the most complaints of any other agency. Anyway.
Well, if I might, Senator.
Yeah, okay, sure.
So I'd offer here, this is one of the challenges of sort of running the student loan program, right, is that the government requires infrastructure and support. And I think one of the rhetorical issues here is I too, having read that report, would find it deeply disturbing if but were it true. The challenge is that it sort of misleads dramatically and makes many false statements. In my opening statement, I covered a lot of that. My written testimony goes into that. I think the real question is, how do we get to a servicing environment that is meeting the expectations? And number one, the government has got to partner with servicers to work together to improve these things. So we've had servicers lead. 7 of them had said to the government, thanks, but no thanks. We don't want to work for you anymore. And continuing that process just means we're churning as opposed to improving. And that's what we need to work on. So I think working together, we can talk about how do we get the Department of Education to partner with servicers to issue guidance in a timely fashion, for the government to give sufficient resources so we can do that outreach. That call hold time and call center hours that were cut, that was at the department's direction because they did not have sufficient resources. That was not a servicer choice. And these are the kind of things we need to work together. So rather than having these sort of hyperbolic reports that really don't say anything substantive, we need to work together on what the actual true nature and architecture of the program is. And I look forward to being able to talk about that further with you.
Yeah. Well, I have anecdotes from my constituents that had that same kind of situation, and it's very frustrating and it's very disappointing as well too. Even if they're looking to pay their loans off, and they make it more difficult, and they increase it without any reason, and I just can't imagine why you would want to make it more difficult or want to work to make it better as well. And now I think my colleague from Georgia made a point that, is it safe to say that every time the president now tries to cancel some debt, and there's an AG from random states to challenge, right? Is that a fact, Reyes?
That's correct. Being from that same state, none of us have asked the attorneys general to intervene. And I believe, as we've heard today,
Yeah, I've never met anyone saying, no, please don't cancel my,
right. Right. There's nobody in Kansas City, nobody in St. Louis or anywhere in the state who's been asking. And I think what we are seeing and what we've seen today is how many people nationally are impacted. but they are looking to get standing to continue to bring these challenges based on the relationship between MOHELA and the state of Missouri, but really the harm extends far beyond it. It is purely political, and I think it is purely anti all of the people in red shirts behind me and the millions more who are impacted by it.
Yeah, well, and now since then I'm chairman, I'm going to give myself more time. At any rate, and it's clear that anytime the president makes a move to, give some relief to students, and then there's going to be a lawsuit, and generally some of those kinds of cases may end up being at the Supreme Court. And now it seems to me that the Supreme Court has been really overly political, and it seems to be going to making it more and more difficult to even deliver that kind of aid as well. And we moved much quicker for the Silicon Valley Bank was in collapse. It was like, how much can we do? How much can we do? And I don't think any of these borrowers could have crashed the American economy, one of their loans. But I don't know why there seems to be no outrage for that. But they seem to be that if we're going to deliver some aid for students, in this, I don't really understand that, but it's troubling, and it underscores that, in my opinion, over politicizing the Supreme Court. But regardless, just thank all of you and every of you that came to make a point wearing your shirts, and others that are here as well. And I guess I believe I'm the last speaker as well too. And thank you. You. All right. Well, we're going to a brief recess, and then we have a couple more until my colleague from Massachusetts returns. Okay, then. So I apologize for that comment.
Used a law that said, in a pandemic, the president could, and I'm going to quote, waive or modify student loans. Now, we all know what happened next. An extremist Supreme Court, the same court that overturned Roe versus Wade, twisted the plain meaning of the law and ripped away debt cancellation from 43 million Americans. The less told story, MOHELA, was at the center of all of it. The Republican states challenging President Biden's plan basically couldn't explain how they were harmed by student debt cancellation. And without an explanation of how they were harmed, they didn't have legal standing to sue. So their answer was MOHELA. Mayor Lucas, why was MOHELA so critical to the lawsuit that blocked President Biden's first debt cancellation plan?
Well, Madam Chair, I would never pretend to tell the law to a law professor, but the issue, as you have articulated, relates to standing. And the argument was because MOHELA, the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority, was established by the state of Missouri, they would lose business as a servicer if the debt cancellation were to go through. That then would create harm, not just to MOHELA, but to the people of Missouri, which is counterintuitive for any normal person or Missourian. And that was, at least in the eyes of the court, sufficient to establish that standing and allow the lawsuit to proceed.
Yeah, exactly. Nice explanation for a really twisted argument here, but it was enough to persuade this Supreme Court. Now, MOHELA is the only federal student loan servicer that considers itself to be part of a state. In court filings and in public letters, including as recently as 2 days ago, MOHELA has repeatedly said that it is, quote, an arm of the state of Missouri. This is important because in MOHELA's view, its public status affords it special privileges, including the privilege of not having to answer to borrowers who have been harmed by MOHELA's servicing errors. Ms. Yu, last December, borrowers brought a class action lawsuit against MOHELA, arguing that MOHELA had failed to process the public service loan forgiveness applications in a timely way, very much like what happened to Ms. White, and that it cost people money. Can you help unpack MOHELA's argument here? Why would MOHELA respond by saying, stay away from me, I'm part of the state of Missouri?
Well, under the Constitution, state governments can't be sued for violating the law unless they consent to the suit. So what MOHELA is trying to argue here is that because they were created by the Missouri state legislature, it is therefore immune from consumer protection laws.
So they just say, I just want to make sure I've got this straight. MOHELA agreed to follow all of the federal, state, and local laws in the contract that it signed. It voluntarily signed this contract for which it gets paid, this contract with the Department of Education. And it signs a contract, I just want to be clear here, is the contract that MOHELA signs any different from every other student loan servicers?
It is not.
Nope. So they make exactly the same representations and the same commitments. And just like every other student loan servicer, MOHELA got paid millions of dollars on these contracts. But unlike any other student loan servicer, MOHELA now claims it can't be sued even when it takes the money and fails to do the job. So let me just start it this way. Is there anyone testifying here today who thinks that MOHELA shouldn't be required to comply with the same laws and the same obligations as every other student loan servicer? I see no one. All right. I just want to say I am very concerned that MOHELA is trying to hide behind its quasi-public status to evade responsibility for its servicing failures and to try to duck out on the harm that it has inflicted on public servants. I had hoped that the MOHELA CEO would be here in person to explain his side of the story, so I am disappointed that he refused to attend. I will continue to press for answers on this. The Department of Education has created new performance standards for servicers. I understand there are many servicers who've complained about that, but the department has said you've got to meet higher standards here. Now what's critical is the Department of Education needs to enforce those standards to the letter. MOHELA has repeatedly failed millions of borrowers, and it's time for real action and real accountability. So, with that, I want to get to my last piece of paper here. Here we go. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. I very much appreciate your taking your time to come here. Questions for the record from other senators are due 1 week from today. That's Wednesday, April 17th. For our witnesses, you will then have 45 days to respond to any questions that have been submitted. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.